What's up, America? Alright, so today I'm going to be answering some of the questions from the debate. Let's get started. This first round of questioning comes from Leon Panetta, the CIA Director and former Secretary of Defense. Well, the fun answer to that question would be to nuke their asses back to the Stone Age. But let's be realistic. That's not something that's going to happen. Nuclear war is a dead-end path. So, I think I'd have to gather up whoever knows the most about it, military advisors and whatnot, and sit down and formulate a few different options for what we can do. And I would follow their advice as much as possible. But I would definitely be favoring the idea of assassinating whoever ordered the strikes. Well, darn. I guess if that's off the table, we'll just have to go with a, proportional response? Whatever that may be, depending on the situation of the attack. So, I think we'll stick with that answer then. A proportional response. I don't really think that we can stop them. We've been trying unsuccessfully. They're completely committed to having them. So instead of wasting time trying to stop it, let's just embrace it. Let's bring them into the nuclear arms treaty with the rest of the nuclear nations. That way we can monitor how many they have, where they're pointed, where they're stored, and we can focus on the more important aspect, which is keeping them from ever making it to U.S. soil. Well, I would say that my biggest criticism is probably the fact that he's pissing everyone off. Just absolute disrespect to all other nations. I would do that differently. I don't think that I would be an asshole. I think as the president, you should have people that tell you what you're allowed to say and what not to say, and you should probably listen to those people before you risk offending an entire nation. Round 2 of questions comes from Lauren de Jong Schulman, the Deputy Director of Studies from the Center for New American Security. First off, I just want to say I am pretty much against military intervention as a whole. But there are certain circumstances which it is necessary. For one, if our assets or allies overseas are threatened, they need to know that they have our unwavering support. But otherwise, if it doesn't mess with our business, it ain't none of our business. But again, if it messes with our business, it becomes our business. Again, I feel like if our allies are in the fight, we're there with them. I wouldn't have gone into that on our own by any means. Civil wars need to be fought out by their own countries. That's why they exist. We shouldn't support one side or another. We should let nature run its course. If the civilians want to have an uprising, let them. Well, my first meeting with the National Security Council, I imagine that it would probably go something along the lines of introductions. Hey, how's it going? Who are you? Blah, blah, blah. Nice to meet you. What do you do here? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, nice. Then we'd probably sit down and be like, all right, so what's going on in the realm of national security? And I would have them tell me what's going on, what they're doing, what still needs to be done, and I guess we would kind of brainstorm. I'd see if I maybe had some out-of-the-box ideas that might help them along their way, and I might have some criticisms. So it's hard to say exactly what would happen, but I guarantee it would be long and boring.
Questions come from Bishop Garrison, former Deputy Foreign Policy Advisor for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. These were also some of my favorite questions to answer. I really like where this guy's head's at. Now, Mr. Garrison is not a member of the X-Men, and I did not create the comic book.
Well, that is a very good question. The simplest answer would be to invest heavily in green technologies instead of fossil fuels. That way we can actually begin the process of debugging it and figuring out what's going on, and hopefully we can defeat the Chinese at coming up with new technologies, and then we can boost our own economy through that way. And I'd like to think of it as a friendly rivalry, kind of like the space race between the U.S. and Russia, trying to be the first ones to the moon. I think that we could be the first ones that have a very green economy, if not a totally green economy, and just using everything else to subsidize. No more emissions from government vehicles domestically. I want clean air. Another thing I want to do is I want roadside planters. I want to literally make America green. I want to have foliage along the roadsides and on the huge concrete faces of the overpasses to help absorb the emissions from vehicles. I also want to put solar panels over roadways, because it'll not only absorb light and turn it into energy, but it'll also help reduce the radiant heat that's absorbed by the asphalt. That blacktop produces a lot of heat that just continues to radiate through the night. So, again, less warming. I want solar arrays in the desert. Why don't we have solar farms off in our huge, massive desert? When you drive around out there, there's giant plots of land for sale, and there's just nobody doing anything with it. Let's turn that into energy for the nation. I want to invest heavily in updating the electrical grid. That way it can withstand the intermittent power coming from wind and solar energies. That way we're ready for the green energy revolution. Some of y'all are watching, and you're thinking, what the heck is a PVHI? So photovoltaic, it's like Latin or something. It pretty much translates to light electricity, which is what we know as solar panels, PV panels or PV cells. So these cells, when they sit, when they first install them, they clear out all the ground, brush, and whatever else, which is actually a heat mitigator. It reduces the amount of heat in the area, which is why cities have more heat than the countryside. And then the solar panel itself generates heat as it creates electricity, because electricity creates heat. So as the solar panel sits and the sun shines on it and it heats it all up, then in the evenings, these fields of solar panels just trap the heat that's there, and it continues to radiate, actually worsening the effects of radiant and ambient temperatures and heat. Good old-fashioned American ingenuity. So, now that we know that there's a problem, we can find a way to fix it. Whether it be creating cylindrical solar whatever, that way the heat can go away, or putting a little fan underneath it. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I'm not pretending to be. $20 billion a year subsidizing coal and other dirty energies. If we spent half of that funding local business startups that were creating new and innovative ways to deal with these problems, then we will overcome them. Well, from what I understand about Afghanistan is it's pretty much there's 14 recognized ethical groups and various tribes that are all unique and have their own customs and their own way of life, and foreign powers that want the oil-rich fields or whatever else from the country find it difficult to negotiate with all of the various peoples of Afghanistan. So we're essentially just over there trying to force a centralized government on them that's easy for us to work with. And they don't really like it that much. Instead, I think that what we should do is recognize each of the 14 tribes or ethnic groups or whatever, and each of their own territories as a sovereign state in Afghanistan, and deal with them locally. Maybe, I don't know, just let them work it out.
This round of questionings comes from Corey Sheikh, Deputy Director General at the International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Well, I suppose that the defense budget should be enough to keep us safe. That's a very, very broad definition. As a military spouse, I constantly hear of the waste the military does, so I definitely think it could be less. I recently heard of legislation that Congress had to pass that the military, Department of Military, whatever, wasn't allowed to spend more than like a third or a quarter of their budget, or it was going from a third to a quarter of their budget in the very last couple months of the year. To me, that says that a third to a quarter of their budget is entirely unnecessary. They haven't needed it for the entire rest of the year, and they're just blowing it for the sake of having it available for next year. And that seems very, very wasteful. I think instead, I would like to put that energy towards green infrastructure projects. That's a bold question. I'm not going to be in charge of China. I'm running for president of the United States, so I'm not going to be managing China. I'm pretty sure that the Chinese are going to be doing that. As far as like the trade war and tariffs and intellectual property rights go, I would really like to get rid of a bunch of our tariffs that are hurting Americans, especially our farmers. They are losing their asses out there because their government has forsaken them, and the Chinese people want our goods. We should give it to them. They're willing to sell us their steel and aluminum and other finite resources, and we're selling them our grain and meat and other renewable resources. I'm not really sure what this question's asking. I mean, do you want how it's screwing us over or how it could be improved? I read the White House press release on this deal, and it pretty much, to me, just seems like we are taking Canadian and Mexican resources, American and Mexican labor force, and the American and Canadian industrial standards, and then we're all just kind of pooling it together to create a world financial powerhouse. And I don't know the specifics of it, but I mean, based on what I do understand about it, it seems like it could be a workable idea. Leaders in the past have obviously thought that it was worth the risk. So unless I get information contrary, I'll just go ahead and keep rolling with it.
This batch of questions comes from Thomas Countryman, the former acting undersecretary for the State of Arms Control and International Security at the State Department.
let's be honest. All-out nuclear war is a thing of the past. The nuclear arms race got so out of hand that collectively, as a species, we decided that it wasn't even an option. Nowadays, nuclear weapons are just bargaining chips at the world political table. It's a way for countries to show that they're part of the mutually assured destruction group as well. And honestly, if we just treated these countries with respect at that table, they wouldn't feel the need to build nuclear arsenals because they would already have their voices heard. That being said, if I still got time left, I would like to invest in some green bombs. If we're going to be going to war, I want to kill the hell out of our enemy, but I still want to leave the land to where it's usable. Oh, this is being an easy one. Absolutely! And I think I will start dealing with the nuclear risk by dealing with all the waste we have here in America that is a risk to our people. And I'm pretty sure that when we address that, Russia won't mind. Well, another simple question that has a very short, simple answer. Yes. Yes, I would sign a 5-year extension on that. And I would even try to bring Korea into the New START agreement. That way, if they're going to have nuclear weapons, they should have limits too. That way, we all have our caps, and we can proceed from there.
This round of questions comes from Mara Carlin, former Deputy Secretary of Defense for Strategy and Force Development at the Department of Defense.
I feel like I've already answered this question in the first round from Leon Panetta. So just to recap, when the military is used is pretty much for humanitarian efforts, congressionally approved invasions, retaliations, and protecting our assets and allies. Which I guess if you take away the word overseas, also includes civil unrest. So there's that. Well, the way I understand it, it works something like this. The president works with his cabinet, his advisors, whoever else he can get the information from, and they come up with a possible solution to whatever the issue at hand may be, and then they run it by Congress. And Congress will either give it a green light, go ahead, yeah, that's good. They might say, I like the idea, but you're going to have to change some things about it for it to be good. Or they might just all in all be like, no, that's not happening. So, yeah, that's pretty much how that works. I'd give Trump a C minus. I feel like his heart is in the right place, even though he might be a little misguided. His thing with Russia, trying to make friends with them, that's definitely a good move. I mean, it's better to be friends than enemies. Although he does it in crazy, sketchy ways. As far as what I would do differently, let's see. For starters, I would respect the Middle Eastern tribal government. I actually think that's kind of cool. It's unique. It's different. Anyways, let's see. I would resolve the trade war with China, because that's just hurting everyone. And I probably would respect local customs whenever I went abroad to visit. Yeah, I think that's about it.
This come from Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications and Speechwriting, the White House.
I do think it's important to keep our nuclear arsenal up to date. We got to keep up with competing countries to make sure that we maintain the competitive advantage. That being said, nuclear arsenal is very expensive. Our country spends tons of money on it, and I think we could probably get away with spending just a little bit less. I would like to spend that on, I don't know, infrastructure. It's really what we need. Clean energy, all the good things. Updates. Let's make America better. Israel has been a valuable ally in the Middle East. But if they can't play nice, then maybe we should start cutting their funding. We can put it towards some of the green infrastructure projects I have in mind. But ultimately, I think that this falls under the Department of State and the Secretary of State to deal with this matter. And whoever I appointed as Secretary of State, I would do so under the complete assumption that they can handle it. And I assumed they would have the best judgment. And if I had any questions or concerns about what they were doing, we could have a nice sit down and they could address my concerns, answer any of my questions before we pass it on to Congress. But yeah, ultimately, that's State Department. Well, I would consider rejoining the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, but I would want concrete proof that it really benefited the majority of Americans. I wouldn't want to enter into a deal that was kind of only benefiting a few and screwing over the rest. As far as my difference in trade policy between what's going on now, it'd be like night and day. I want those raw material resources. That way we can rework them and sell them to the rest of the world. That's good for our economy. I'm not going to be looking for getting the best possible deal because let's face it, 50% of something is better than 70% of nothing.
All right, these questions come from Kelly Magzamin, the Vice President for National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress.
That's an interesting question. So from what I understand about the whole Russian interference thing is that they had bots and it was convincing people that they should do something, but since that's not really an offense, they decided to be like, oh, well, they were hacking into Hillary's emails or whatever. I'm not really sure how that interferes with the election. I think the real concern is that Americans are being Jedi mind tricked by the internet. And there's nothing we can really do to protect against that. But what we can do as far as protecting what happens after that point and ensuring that everyone's vote is properly counted is maybe we should start using simpler machines. Just, something really simple that can't be hacked, isn't really connected to any networks of any kind, just takes whatever the voter said, like an old school Scantron, and then it takes a picture of it. That way it has it on file to look through in case they, select an independent candidate. Very simple question gets a simple answer. So the way I view it is that all policies should reflect the best interest of America as a whole. So the role of our military in foreign policy is there to aid our allies, including humanitarian efforts, as well as a deterrent to foreign aggressions.
The final round of questioning comes from John Feiner, former Chief of Staff and Director of Policy Planning at the State Department.
Both. They are a technological rival as well as an economic partner. They got some really cool tech, and they keep us on our toes in that respect. And we trade with them, and it helps both of our economies. So we should probably treat them with respect moving forward. Well, as far as steps go, aside from wanting to do a clean energy infrastructure, having zero emission vehicles, negative carbon buildings and roadways, and fixing the EPA, because I don't know what the hell's going on with that. That's just wacky. I think climate change issues are a state by state, regional thing. Different areas have different effects to worry about. So the federal government should probably just allow a annual budget for their improvements. Well, I want to end most of our conflicts, especially in the Middle East. That's been going on for way too long. But ultimately, it's my advisors would be bearing the burden of when we'd be going to war, because they would come to me and they'd be like, "Oh, Mr. President, we have to go to war. It can't be avoided." And I would respond to something to the effect of like, wars are expensive. Like, so are all the other projects I got going. I can't afford a war. Are you sure there's no other way we can do this? And they'd be like, no, we've tried everything twice. There's nothing we can do. You're like, well, alright. I guess we should solve this as fast as possible so I can get back to doing fun stuff. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and always share. We're making history. I hope you're part of it.